Imagine building your dream from nothing, watching millions of people believe in your vision, and then suddenly hearing you are no longer the person who should lead this company. In 1985, at only 30 years old, Steve Jobs walked away from Apple, the company he founded, the company that carried his name, the company that represented everything he believed in. To the world, it looked like failure. A young entrepreneur who had reached the top only to lose everything. But what nobody realized at that moment was that losing Apple would become the experience that transformed Steve Jobs forever. Because sometimes, the greatest chapters of our lives begin after the moment we think our story is over. This is the story of Steve Jobs, the man who lost his company and returned to change the world.
Chapter 1. The Curious Child. Steve Jobs was not born knowing he would change the world. Before the company, before the fame, before the billions of devices carrying his ideas, there was only a curious child who wanted to understand how things worked. Born in 1955 and adopted by Paul and Clara Jobs, Steve grew up in Mountain View, California, a place that would later become the center of the technology revolution. His father, Paul, was a skilled mechanic and craftsman. From him, Steve learned a lesson that would shape his entire life. True quality exists even in the places people never see. While working with his father on machines and electronics, Steve developed an obsession with detail. He didn't just want things to function, he wanted them to be beautiful, simple, meaningful. As a teenager, Steve became fascinated with computers and the emerging world of technology around him. But what made him different was not just his interest in machines. It was his ability to imagine what those machines could become. He saw technology not as something cold and complicated, but as something that could empower human creativity. Then he met Steve Wozniak. Wozniak understood how to build the technology. Jobs understood how to make people care about it. Together, they shared one belief. Computers were not just tools for experts. They could become tools for everyone. And that belief would become the foundation of Apple. Great achievements rarely begin with success. They begin with curiosity. The ability to look at something ordinary and imagine something extraordinary. Before Steve Jobs changed technology, he first learned to see the world differently. Chapter 2. Building Apple. In 1976, inside a small garage in California, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak began building something most people could not imagine. At that time, computers were massive machines used by universities, corporations, and scientists. But Jobs saw a different future. He believed computers would not remain locked inside laboratories. One day, they would become personal tools that could help ordinary people create. The first Apple computer was the beginning of that vision. While Wozniak focused on engineering, Jobs focused on something equally important: the human experience. He cared about how technology looked, how it felt, how people connected with it. That vision helped turn the Apple II into one of the first successful personal computers, bringing technology into homes, schools, and businesses. But Jobs wanted more than functional machines. He wanted computers that were simple, intuitive, and beautiful. That ambition led to the Macintosh, a computer built around one revolutionary idea. Technology should adapt to people, not people adapting to technology. The Macintosh changed the way millions interacted with computers and proved that technology could be both powerful and personal. But creating something extraordinary came with a price. Jobs' pursuit of perfection pushed his team harder than ever before. Some saw it as impossible pressure. Others saw it as the force behind Apple's innovation, because Steve Jobs believed great products are not created by accepting what exists. They are created by imagining what is possible. Steve Jobs did not just build computers. He built a vision of the future. He understood that innovation is not only about technology, it is about
people. The greatest creators are those who see possibilities before others do. But as Apple grew, success brought new challenges. And soon, Steve Jobs would face the biggest failure of his life. Chapter 3. Fired from his own company. By the mid-1980s, Apple was no longer a small startup operating from a garage. It had become one of the most exciting technology companies in the world. But behind the success, a storm was building. Steve Jobs had a powerful vision for Apple. He wanted to create revolutionary products, even if it meant challenging expectations and pushing people beyond their limits. But as the company grew, the qualities that made Jobs extraordinary also created conflict. His obsession with perfection, his intense leadership style, his refusal to accept anything less than excellence.
Some believed these qualities were necessary for innovation. Others believed they were making the company difficult to manage. In 1983, Apple brought in John Sculley, a successful executive from PepsiCo, to help lead the company. At first, Jobs and Sculley worked together, but over time, their visions for Apple's future began to separate. Jobs wanted to focus on creating groundbreaking products. Others wanted a more stable and predictable business approach. The disagreement eventually became a battle for control, and in 1985, the company Steve Jobs helped create removed him from power. At only 30 years old, Steve Jobs was forced to leave Apple. The world saw it as a devastating failure. The young founder who had changed the computer industry was now outside the company that carried his vision. But years later, Jobs would say that being fired from Apple was one of the most valuable experiences of his life, because losing Apple forced him to discover something he had forgotten. He was not only the founder of one company, he was a creator, and creators can always begin again. Sometimes the greatest turning points in life do not arrive as victories. They arrive as losses. Steve Jobs lost the company he built, but he gained something even more important: the freedom to rebuild himself. Failure removed the identity he had created around Apple, and in that empty space, he discovered a new version of himself. Because sometimes, life closes one door not to end your journey, but to prepare you for a chapter you never expected. Chapter 4. Next, Pixar and Reinvention. After leaving Apple, Steve Jobs entered the most uncertain chapter of his life. For the first time in years, he was no longer the face of a revolutionary company. He had lost the platform that made him famous. But instead of looking backward, Jobs decided to create again. In 1985, he founded a new computer company called Next. The goal was ambitious: build the next generation of computers for education and business. Although Next computers were not a commercial success like Apple, the company became a place where Jobs refined his ideas about design, software, and user experience. But his greatest transformation came from an unexpected place: Pixar. Jobs had purchased a small computer graphics division from Lucasfilm, believing it could become something special. At the time, few people imagined computer-generated animation would change entertainment forever. But Jobs saw potential. He invested in the team, supported their creativity, and eventually, Pixar created Toy Story, the world's first fully computer-animated feature film. It became a historic success. More importantly, it changed Steve Jobs. The years away from Apple taught him patience. They taught him collaboration. They taught him that great ideas require more than one person's vision. The young founder who once believed everything had to happen his way was becoming a different kind of leader. A leader who understood that innovation was not only about having brilliant ideas, it was about building teams capable of bringing those ideas to life. Success can teach you confidence, but failure teaches you growth. When Steve Jobs left Apple, he lost his company, but he gained perspective. The experiences at Next and Pixar prepared him for the moment he would eventually return, not as the same person who left, but as someone ready to rebuild Apple and change technology forever. Chapter 5. The return that changed technology. In 1997, Steve Jobs returned to Apple, but the company he came back to was struggling. Apple was losing money. Its product lineup was confusing, and many believed its greatest days were already behind it. But Jobs saw the real problem. Apple had not lost its ability to create, it had lost its focus. His solution was simple: remove the unnecessary, focus on excellence. Create products people would love. The first sign of Apple's comeback came with the iMac in 1998. It was colorful, simple, and unlike any computer people had seen before. It showed the world that technology could be powerful and beautiful. Then came the iPod. Apple transformed the way people experienced music by putting thousands of songs into a device that fit in their pocket. But Jobs was thinking beyond individual products. He was building an ecosystem where hardware, software, and services worked together. Then, in 2007, Apple introduced the iPhone, a device that combined a phone, music player, camera, and internet browser into one revolutionary product. The iPhone changed how billions of people communicate, work, and interact with technology. And once again, Steve Jobs had created something the world did not know it needed until it existed. The greatest comeback stories are not about returning to where you started. They are about returning as a different person. Steve Jobs did not come back to Apple trying to repeat the past. He came back with new lessons from failure, new experiences from Pixar and Next, and a clearer vision. The man who was once removed from Apple became the person who transformed it into one of the most influential companies in history. Chapter 6: His Final Years and Lasting Legacy. By the end of his life, Steve Jobs had already changed the world more than once. But his journey was far from just a story about technology. It was a story about belief. In his final years, Jobs continued leading Apple with the same passion that had defined his career. He helped introduce the iPad, a device that once again changed how people interacted with technology. But behind the success, he was facing a personal battle. His health was declining, yet he continued working, creating, and sharing his vision for the future. In 2011, Steve Jobs passed away at the age of 56. The world lost a remarkable creator, but his ideas continue to live on. Millions of people around the world still use products shaped by his philosophy. Technology should be simple, beautiful, and meaningful. Steve Jobs' greatest achievement was not creating computers, phones, or devices. It was showing the world what happens when creativity meets determination. Final reflection. Steve Jobs' story was never a straight line to success. It was filled with curiosity, ambition, failure, and reinvention. He built Apple, lost Apple, walked away, learned, and returned stronger than before. His life reminds us of one powerful lesson. A setback does not define your story. The way you respond to it does. Sometimes losing what you built is the moment you discover what you are truly capable of creating. Because history is not changed by people who never fail. History is changed by people who continue creating after they do. At Wisdom Everflows, we explore the stories behind the people who shaped history and the lessons hidden inside their journeys. If this story inspired you, subscribe for more timeless stories of courage, creativity, and greatness. Remember, your greatest chapter may begin after your biggest setback.